The phrase living in a dictatorship is passed around every couple of years, and anybody who has a bit of an interest in, let's say, world history will vastly or almost immediately recognize that, believe you me, from things like the butt naked general to things like Saddam Hussein, dictatorships come and go and they vary considerably, not just in terms of viciousness, lawlessness, or a complete and irreprehensible take on human suffering, or rather the exploitation of human suffering. But then we come across CWCville, and the resemblance to Joseph Stalin is not necessarily the most uncanny thing we've seen today. Because, bear in mind, Stalin named an entire city for himself. Well, mind you, so did Lenin, but that's besides the point. And like most other dictators, or at least the ones in the visage, if you will, of Christian Western Chandler, CWCville is like no other. The city of CWCville, a vibrant community with happy people, cool chicks, business, and a frustrated male. Not the words of a troll, but from Sonichu issue 2, which is the third issue in the overall series. I am not even going to try and explain how that makes sense. CWCville, pronounced Quickville, also stylized as Quickville, is an independent and self-governing city-state in Northern Virginia, United States. Despite its leaders' claims to the contrary, the country is a totalitarian dictatorship sporting a pervasive personality cult around the leader. No independent judiciary, nor any separation of powers, mass surveillance of the populace, as well as a largely autonomous paramilitary organizations. The economy is almost exclusively geared towards serving the whims of the ruling elite, with many of the country's citizens living in homeless shelters. Due to widespread discontent, elements of a facade democracy have been at times introduced and retracted again. The country has engaged in state terrorism against neighboring countries in the past. As the name suggests, CWCville is derived from Chris's own initials and serves as much of an exercise in boosting his ego as you would expect. While the setting was initially believed exist to justify his self-insert presence in Sonichu, it was later learned that Chris's concept of a utopia had origins with a Lego city created in his own bedroom, predating even the webcomic. Additional lore provided over the years also indicated that Chris himself is not the founder of the city, but his father was, and he named it after his newborn son. Presumably because, like David Allen Chandler Ville or, Samantha Ville didn't really have the same sort of ring to it. Chris believes that CWCville actually exists, and for many years used the city as a way to escape from anything he does not like. The lists for that, by the way, is vast and almost limitless. Recently, Chris has used other means of coping, and CWCville became part of the parallel dimension of C197, which he also believes to exist. Curiously enough, Chris has occasionally referred to Charlottesville as CWCville. It's about as close as he'll probably ever get, so there you go. Etymology. One of Chris's homemade Pokemon cards from the year 2000 featured a Quick City Gym, while an unfinished Game Boy camera project dating from 2001 used the spellings Quickieville and Quickieville, a sign on the door to his room used to read Christian W. Chandler's Quickville City Gym. It is unknown why he changed the spelling. Likely the alternative spelling just didn't stimulate his massive ego as much as his unaltered initials. Even if it makes a lot less sense, although Christown, Chandlerville, etc. would have just been as good and made a lot more sense. However, this being Chris, if you're coming into this expecting things to make sense, I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but they don't. Overview. The city of Quickville, where true love blossoms between true loving couples. The narrator of Sonichu Issue 5. Quickville is the setting of Sonichu, a city in Northern Virginia of which Chris was mayor for life. Quickville is where Chris portrays friends and enemies from his real life in scenarios altered to reflect his bias towards himself. As his ideal metropolitan community, Quickville illustrates Chris's poor understanding of how a city actually functions. Like everything else that appears in his comic, Chris believed for many years that Quickville actually exists, claiming at one point to be the mayor of Quickville in real life. As an entity, Chris believes to be real. Quickville is a coping mechanism used to compensate for his unsatisfying actual life. It has been argued that the unconquerable quality of Chris's ego is bolstered by his ability to retreat to Quickville, where he can right all wrongs done to him. In his comics, we see him defeating Mary Lee Walsh, with whom he holds an IRL grudge, beating the jerk-ops and bringing his dead dog Paddy Chandler back to life in the form of an anthropomorphic Patty Chan. The main reason Chris can do such superhuman acts is due to the fact that in Quickville, his will is supreme. This serves as a safety blanket that protects his physically and mentally feeble self from the outside world, where he holds no such power. Chris is greatly concerned with people who are misinformed about any detail of Quickville, or conclude that that is anything but a clean, secure, orderly, and safe city. And being coerced into declaring Billy Mays the new mayor of Quickville, Chris repeatedly attempted to redact the statement claiming, "I am still the mayor of Quickville, there is circa no elections." Oh, that's reassuring, that, isn't it? Chris seems to think that anyone who understands what Quickville is like will love it. No, honestly, I think Moralton probably makes a better metropolis at this stage. The seed of Quickville was planted early in Chris's life. An avid Lego enthusiast, Chris eventually put all of his completed Lego kits, original Lego creations, and various handmade Sonichu items together on the one table in his room. In February of 2011, Chris claimed to have finally disassembled the Lego model, but he insisted that the city still stands strong today within my own mind and hands. The first official Quickville media was made in 2001. After toying with more phonetic spellings, Chris settled on Quickville. In 2003, the spelling features the initials of his full name and its pronunciation must be explained to others, indicative of Quickville's nature as a self-serving and insular fantasy. Even in his ultimate self-serving fantasy, in which he's given himself unchecked power for life, Chris's stunted imagination granted him only the title of mayor. Based on his maps, Quickville consists of so few buildings that it would more accurately qualify as a village or hamlet, although this could be a consequence of his physical and mental limitations. He later created the Land of Rulequick, a Sonichu ripoff of Hyrule. A different character rules it instead of Chris's self-insert, for whatever reason. All this suggests that at least in terms of his understanding of the world, Chris lags behind even an early grade school age child. And probably does still to this day, to be fair. In late 2017, Chris ceased being merely the mayor of a town and instead became goddess of an entire dimension. Chris's earlier restraint may be due to his extremely limited worldview, in which his entire world centers around his immediate surroundings, namely his hometown of Ruckersville and nearby Charlottesville. This weak sense of one's surroundings is a trait that is typically seen only in young children who lack basic life experience. That also ticks a large box when it comes to Chris in terms of just seeing the outside world. Something that, to be honest, I feel like Bob kind of wanted Chris to feel at some point. One might hope that Chris's ability to understand scope and relevance had improved, but he has instead become only more delusional. In universe history, according to Sonichu issue 8, Chris's father Bob Chandler founded Quickville in 1982. In a blog in September 2024, Chris retconned this in favor of the far more confusing law that Bob became mayor of Quickville by godly divine decree and order around when Chris started going to Providence Middle School, implying that the city was actually founded by someone else at an undetermined point of time, and pushing the Chandler dynasty's takeover back to 1993. It was unclear for a very long time, or such a time as when anybody stopped caring, why the city was not just called Robertsville, as well as how Chris actually came to inherit it in his fiefdom. Fiefdom? Is that a word? Speculations about possible coups and damnatio memoria of the city's founder were finally put to rest in early 2025 with the Autobots of Quickville essay, where Chris revealed that Bob had planned for Chris to take over after him from the start and teamed up with Magi-chan to physically and magically train Chris with physical powers. Well, psychic powers, but do you really think Chris could do both, let alone one? To fend off from all sorts of troublemakers that threatened the city and state. Magi-chan was further revealed to have recruited an army of Pokemon to defend the city as early as 1980, from what remains incredibly unclear. Geography and location. Quickville began life as an infill city somewhere within the state of Virginia, but it became part of the larger C197 dimension. When Chris started promoting the dimensional merge, according to Sonichu issue 6, one of the shortcut portals to Quickville was a dance mat behind the door to Chris's room. Today, Chris uses so-called meditation sessions to get there. In 2020, Chris narrowed the location of the Quickville to somewhere north to northwest east of Fredericksburg, Virginia. He later placed Quickville Beach by the shore of the Potomac River east of Fredericksburg, claiming that the city is as large as Baltimore or New York City. The exact locations of key Quickville places as they relate to the real world, such as the Quickville Mall, remain unclear. Unless Chris actually adopted a system of, size, scope, square miles, stuff like that, but yeah, it's surprising that Chris never thought to actually really throw his weight behind this, because one, there's a lot of weight to throw, but second, I could easily see Chris getting lost for hours in trying to devise exactly how Quickville could look in reality, outside of rather bizarro claims of being as large as Baltimore or New York City. Quickville's zip code was originally 02024-1982, an unused code available for Brockton, Massachusetts. The correct zip code, at least during the infill era, would have started with 22, like Ruckersville 22968. Chris has changed the zip code twice in 2017, as if it was possible through mayoral decree. On the 7th of October, the zip code was 16429, an unused code available for the vicinity of Erie in Pennsylvania, but a real Mexican postcode for Terramoloco, a neighborhood in Mexico City. On the 19th of November, the zip code changed to 69488, raising suspicions that the idea guys who were active around the time may be responsible, because 69488 is the postal code for Birkenau in Germany, which shares its name with the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. It can also be seen as the combination of the number 69, which refers to the sex position, and the number 1488, which refers to the white nationalist slogan, the 14 words. Variations from the canon. There was an exception in Sonichu 1, which had a map that placed Quickville near Pallet Town and Giovanni's Gym in Viridian City, featured in the Pokemon series and located in the Kanto region, an area based on the Kanto region in Japan. Wow, after all this time, I actually almost forgot that Kanto is a real place in Japan. Good for them. The map also placed Quickville near Station Square from Sonic the Hedgehog's world. Architecture and city structure. In the earliest renditions of Sonichu, the city of Quickville looked to have far more in common with a small village rather than something that would resemble a city. The city, at this point in time, appears to consist of little more than 8 locations, 3 to 4 of which are residential, 3 private businesses, Station Square and Zapbud Field, which may count as public property, poorly connected to each other over via the use of dirt roads that don't seem to quite fit together properly. Evidently, it's so basically it almost resembles an untested map for, let's say, Pokemon Diamond or Pearl or something like that, where basically nothing really comes together and it's just a way of how can we make this look in reality before, that people learn how to fly. Evidently, after this issue, the city saw some major construction projects, drastically expanding the city into a brutalist sticky dream. The city appears to be strictly segmented into numerous districts. Starting from the left of Quickville, Mayor/Mayor's office stands alone, surrounded only by, presumably, its own car park, taking up a total of 0.25 square miles or 0.402336 squared kilometers. Across the street, there is the Quickville Park, which takes up the exact same amount of space. I don't think you need to think too far to think that, wow, this park must have a fantastic view, because almost to the north is a car park, and presumably to the left is probably a wall of some description. Yeah, because aren't usually parks meant to have wide open spaces where you don't have to stare at a car park for hours on end? Next door to the mall is the subdivision areas, which act as residential buildings for some of the city's residents, including Sonichu himself and his family. Further right, we find 2 more commercial buildings. On the northern side is the Target Mini-Mart, and the southern side is the Walmart Mini-Mart. Despite each being 1/4 the size of the Quickville Mall, they both seemingly lack parking areas. So it's basically it's almost like if you try to describe, let's say, the Bronx to somebody via fax machine, and basically said everything is so close together that forget the fact that there's a car park at all. I'm surprised you're going to have any more than about maybe 10 people using it, because by that point, who on earth is going to be able to get in? You see, at least in the UK, architecture and planning seems more based. It's more of an art than science, because generations beforehand had no way in terms of city plan in formulating how city planning would evolve and change, and how we would have to add more onto to the scale of civilization. I mean, I even have a book devised, from Sigmund Freud, about the early stages of civilization and how we learn to even build from settlements into larger towns and cities. But one thing I feel like Freud sort of overlooked a little bit is that when everything is so closely together based on the lack of space, you're going to start creating an atmosphere, almost a prison-like atmosphere, because you won't be able to see the sky anymore unless you tilt your head exactly almost at a 90-degree angle, and you're certainly probably never going to see any patch of greenery or anything resembling a tree, because outside of pollution, caused by the inner city, how on earth are you going to, again, with these buildings so close together, and presumably they all require lighting and stuff like that, you don't really want to look up because you're probably going to be blinded. There's reasons why, like, in city centers, even shops, with open windows and plenty of lighting, they usually are set to a certain degree, because if they were blaring all through day and night, it's the sort of thing that is going to impact people. Because I'm sure there's cases where people have tried to sue stores and stuff like that, because just for being there has caused some level of discomfort. And believe you me, I worked for a year and a half, pretty much in the inner city, and the same problem persists. Everything does feel too closely together. Everything feels incredibly dense and overpopulated, and you start to see less and less of the sky. You start to inhale less clean air. So, providing everything you can get is in the Quickville mode or in these mini marts, I would suggest not spending any amount of time unless it's absolutely necessary in the city. Try and get somewhere out in the country. That is absolutely the way to go, both in Quickville and in the real world. Even further to the right, there appears to be the main city. The city itself apparently stretches an exact 10 square miles on both sides of the street, and consists almost entirely of skyscraper buildings and brutalist block-style residential areas, which presumably the lower classes of Quickville's society calls home. And finally, the furthest area appears to be the mountain range, also a quarter of a mile in size. Despite the Germania style of reconstructing, the roads remain badly thought out and barely usable. Although the roads now actually utilize tarmac instead of simple dirt, there appears to be only one major road leading through the entire city from beginning to end, with no consideration for pedestrians or even how cars are meant to turn around, since the city ends abruptly against a mountain. With the city cut directly in half, the only plausible way anyone from the northern half could reach the southern half would be on foot, since any attempt whatsoever to cross in a car would, best case scenario, bring the entire city's traffic to a halt. So somehow what Chris has actually done is created a traffic system problem even worse than in London. Because in London, despite the sprawling maze-like environment of all of its suburbs, all of its streets, all of its area codes, you can technically still get around London, not necessarily with the greatest of difficulty, because outside of actually just being able to walk, but mind you, have you ever tried walking from as far as, Whitehall to Whitechapel in London? Believe you me, you're probably going to get to at least Oxford Circus, and you will literally have to sit down, because by that point you've walked at least 4 miles, or possibly even for 4 hours. It depends again whereabouts you're going. But then again, one of the advantages London does have is that public transport it's as smooth and as reliable as it possibly can be, because, well, I've used London public transport a couple of times over the years. It's actually a really, really good service. Yeah, there's problems here and there, but that's just commonplace in any large city. Or even in any large city, just use the underground. It's and any experienced Londoner will know exactly where to go, and they'll know exactly when to be there, and they'll also know of all the routes open to them. Quickville, on the other hand, it's like trying to do a U-turn in the Eurotunnel. You do that, and you are literally going to completely block all transportation. Especially because the Eurotunnel is like it's a rail-based one. So, you ever seen a train try to do a U-turn before? No, you have not. There's good reasons for that. There's also good reasons as to why Chris should not get involved in the more governmental side of running a city. International status. Quickville is in theory part of the United States of America, but in practice it seems to be a quasi-independent city-state, similar to Hong Kong or Meizhou in China. The city does not follow American electoral law, uses its own currency, and has several characteristics anathema to US ideals. The city seems more like the private domain of the mayor than part of a larger federation. Almost more, or probably almost more like a Monte Carlo kind of scenario as well. But then again, I think Quickville is probably on average larger than Monte Carlo. It's probably even larger than Liechtenstein or Luxembourg for that matter. Maybe even larger than Vatican City. Even Vatican City has a better mode for public transportation than Quickville does. Despite on paper following the US model of the administration of a small town, the government is in practice a totalitarian dictatorship. The government's grasp on power almost being exclusively maintained through arbitrary violence and terror dashed out by paramilitary organizations who openly enjoy blank check authority from the mayor and answer exclusively to him. Which, yeah, exactly. You know what? They don't have a colonel, they don't have a general. I'm assuming it probably would have been more through more colonel than anyone else. But yeah, the paramilitary has to answer to the mayor as opposed to a colonel. That's Listen. As somebody who is training for the British Army, I've got to say that's one of the most insane things to hear. Because even if we're going through paramilitary organizations, I'm also going to run the gambit in saying that there's no concept of the RSM in places like this, aka there's no regimental police, which, well, as it does say, they police the army. They make sure that they have to obey, and there's certainly no glass house featured in Quickville. And for those who don't know, the glass house is basically a military prison for when soldiers from all ranks and divisions of the armed services are sent for retraining, and well, some of them have to be kicked out as part of their punishment. Yeah, you didn't think I knew it all, but actually, there's a fair amount that I do know about the way the armed forces are governed, and through certain laws they have to obey. Clearly, Chris didn't think to look into that, but then again, I don't. It's I can't see why Chris would have thought otherwise. Anyway, also yes, Sonic's house is on average larger than Giovanni's base, Pallet Town, and Professor Oak. I mean, let's try not and look too deeply into the way that Chris laid this out. I mean, how old was Chris when he did this? Like 20, something like that. I think. I hope he was. I hope he was at least somewhere around about that point. Anyway, furthermore, the police employ psychic mass surveillance on the populace to ensure compliance. Huh. How about that, eh? According to the Samantha Thaddeus emails, the government for the longest time was a king/queen thing, for which there was no voting. There is no separation of power, nor any checks on the mayor's authority. The non-elected leader does what he pleases as mayor for life with supreme power, advised by an elected House of Representatives, which sits at the Quickville Trade Center building. Despite allowing elections for board of director members, Chris shows that they hold no actual authority, existing as a purely advisory committee which the mayor is not obligated to listen to. Oh, that's scary, that isn't it? For example, he does not discuss attacking the 4centgarbage.com building with them. He just tells them the game plan as a fait accompli. Beyond the halls of power, there is a complete lack of state-sanctioned interest groups to make their voices heard, nor evidence of so much as spontaneous acts of public opposition being permitted. The only known opposition leader was, till her capture, the dean of the only college leading a hopeless insurgence, and for that was vilified in the mayoral-controlled press. The mayor attempted for a long time to refute accusations of dictatorship, incorrectly, claiming that dictatorships are never hereditary, while he inherited the town from his father. You know, Chris, and also, can we just but let's bear in mind that technically Adolf Hitler was voted into power just at the point when his influence was starting to decline. But let's again not get bogged down. And then again, well, what about Alexander the Great? Technically, he inherited his father's Macedonian Empire. Just saying. Law and criminal justice. The executive is completely controlled by the mayor, with the police force, the so-called Quickstapo, answering directly to... Yeah, okay, I see what they did there. Answering directly to him. Only and arresting people who were deemed personally opposed to the mayor at random. In the Autobots of Quickville essay, Chris revealed that as early as the 1980s, the city made an alliance with Optimus Prime, and enlisted the help of several Autobots to defend the city. Whether and how these foreign volunteers have been actually properly integrated into the city's police force remains unclear. The judiciary is similarly serving as little but a rubber stamp for the often arbitrary whims of the ruling elite. Walsh was captured, disposed, and sent to a maximum security prison without a trial. The jerkops and manajerks are deposed, yet were supposedly allowed to go scot-free. When Simone LaRoche was murdered by a Voltorb, 4 people, Evan, Alec Benson Leary, Sean and Mal, are arrested and subjected to a show trial less than a week later, despite earlier receiving a public pardon from the mayor. The court system, in practice, disturbingly mirrors many of the hallmarks of Nazi Germany's people's courts. And bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, this was long before the idea guys completely stung Chris's mind with their influence. This whole kangaroo court idea was completely off Chris's own whims and imaginations. So we can't blame the idea guys for this. During the trial of the Asperpedia 4, the judge opens the trial by declaring that he is biased in the mayor's favour. Great start. Insults the defendants on multiple occasions, despite, a mayor or a judge has to be strictly true neutral in all instances and affairs. Otherwise, any such case will be in any court anywhere in the world will be completely thrown out the window. No public defender is provided, and the main defendant is permitted to defend himself and his fellow co-defendants, despite being clearly under the influence of drugs. The judge dishes out draconian punishments, considering slander via the Asperpedia 4 punishable by death. Evidence gathered using Magi-Chan's psychic powers is considered admissible in court. When the 4 are finally found guilty by a clearly biased jury as well, who does not actually recommend the punishment to the judge, they are immediately executed in cruel and inhumane ways. Yeah. Socio-political issues and human rights. Soliciting sex is legal in Quickville, while possession of tobacco is a very serious offence. Alcohol was illegal until 2009, when the ban was rescinded. Laws have been enacted to persecute homosexuals, and psychic surveillance is used to monitor sexual purity. This constant Orwellian surveillance, which is obviously done under the guise of protecting the citizens, flies in the face of the basic human right to privacy. Since there is no plausible way to oversee or contest an official with the capability of ultra-human powers, it also effectively elevates the official above law. The mayor has also hinted that the Electric Hedgehog Pokemon, a legally unrecognized paramilitary organization, have immunity from prosecution. This goes against the concept of supremacy of law that is the very foundation of modern societies. Some sociologists have pointed out that this quality of Quickville is in fact the hallmark of all police states. It must be reiterated that Chris genuinely believes that Quickville is a good place to live. Despite all this perceived military and law enforcement might, the police and paramilitaries demonstrably offer little real protection or competence. Troublemakers like Wes Isley ruin weddings with near impunity, and the dissident leaders remained at large until recently. As of November of 2017, Quickville also houses multiple prison camps on the outskirts, where enemies from the game industry war are sent to be reformed. Elections. I'm still the mayor of Quickville. There is no elections. Chris in 2009, and Christine has had emotions and more stress after being back in office, so she retired from being mayor and gave the job back to Allison in 2017. Chris originally planned to hand over the role of mayor to his sister Crystal in Sonichu issue 10, but later decided not to. On the 3rd of March 2009, Chris announced that Billy Mays was the new mayor of Quickville. The next day, Chris removed his edit that made mayors the new mayor, establishing a government in exile in his bedroom. Most legal scholars, however, argue that since Chris was not wearing the medallion, which Chris has indicated is necessary for a video to be true and honest, his statements to the contrary are false and therefore not legally binding, meaning Billy Mays was still the mayor of Quickville. On the 28th of June 2009, Billy Mays died in his mayoral mansion, allegedly due to a cocaine overdose. But the hand of Chandler was suspected. The city was plunged into mourning. Chris wasted no time in seizing control of Quickville, announcing during a post-coup interview that he was always the ruler, and that there would be no further elections. You know, with that amount of people gathered out in mourning, it probably wouldn't surprise me if the city didn't burn into a massive riot. I mean, they had that many people out there, and announcing no more elections, oh dear Lord, there would be a riot and a half if that happened. However, Chris eventually lost interest in being mayor. By some point prior to 2017, he handed over the role to Allison Amber. In November 2017, an idea guy tricked Chris into believing that an election was to take place, with several candidates running. He created a poll on Twitter for people to vote for the new mayor. The candidates were Brendan Fraser, an American actor known for his role in the Mummy movies, Mao Zedong, Allison Amber, Augusto Pinochet, and Vladimir Putin. A few hours later, he deleted this poll and then created a new one, claiming some of the candidates had dropped out. His new candidates were Bo McKendrick from the video game Payday 2, Vladimir Putin again, and Brendan Fraser. He later deleted this poll as well, and apparently Brendan Fraser won the election and took office as mayor. Good for him, I guess. 2 days later, he posted on Twitter that an election for new chief of Quickville Police Department would take place. His candidates were Manuel Padro Jr., Ian Brandon Anderson, Manuel Noriega, and Edward Gein. Ian Brandon Anderson ended up winning with 65% of the votes. Yeah, so my personal favourite, Edward Gein, did not win, and, well, there you are. Ian Brandon Anderson continues to ruin my day. In April of 2021, Chris stated the current mayor to be Mary Lee Walsh. While in jail, Chris said that Walsh remained mayor. Who has time for elections when us goddesses defend Quickville, the city of, from Ray freaking Wrights, Eggman, Bowser, Giovanni, and so on occasion, and we have the dimensional merge completed and the collective shift in progress. Then we have my second coming on 1218 Earth, not to mention the damage control and prevention that are beyond non-superpower individuals' control anyway. That's quite a lot of process to just end with anyway, you know what I mean? The right to vote has even been extended to those of African descent, though apparently not to women, as some women are seen protesting in order to gain suffrage in Quickville. Recent developments. In February of 2017, prompted by President Trump, Chris declared Quickville to be a sanctuary city. Mirroring a proposal by Charlottesville's real-life mayor, he also suggested that Quickville does not recognize Trump as president at all, lending further credence to the theory that Quickville is not actually part of the United States. Strangely, he claims that Vladimir Putin, the real-life president of Russia, is the president of the United States. What? Between his Facebook posts and the new issues of Sonichu, Chris has revealed significant changes to Quickville since Sonichu issue 10, showing that during the hiatus of Sonichu 11, he had simply continued his fantasy/coping mechanism in his mind. Chris is no longer the mayor. Alison Amber, formerly the mayor's secretary, took up the role. The circumstances of Chris's resignation are unclear, and it is unknown whether Amber was elected or if Quickville remains a dictatorship. Chris gave himself the position of the city's creator instead, since holding the imaginary responsibilities of a small town mayor is too much even for him. Of course, his new position still earns Chris VIP treatment from the townspeople. 3. The city has become even more of a police state, with Magi-chan reading the minds of the populace to determine if anybody poses a threat. Ironically, this solution is far more extreme than anything President Trump has done, including his executive order to shut down entry from select countries, which Chris has criticized. And 4th, on the other hand, in Sonichu issue 12, this shows that Quickville celebrating its SLGBTQ Pride Festival, indicating a reversal of Chris's long-standing homophobia and possibly a continuation of Chris's repeal by fiat in Sonichu issue 10 of the city's anti-gay legislation. The economy. Quickville's economy on paper operates under an American-style free market economy, yet in practice the mayor exercises considerable control over it. The radio station and soft drink company are named after him, which indicates either nationalization of normally private businesses or rampant cronyism. This is further corroborated by the lavish lifestyle afforded to the political and social elite. The city pays for the Trollbuster's private jet, with the mayor's hedgehog friends receiving free housing, credit cards, and other gifts from his office, not unlike Soviet nomenclatura. In particular, Sonichu and Rosechu seem to be unofficial state employees, receiving $3,500 of income per month each, shown in Mailback 21. Further idiosyncrasies are the banning of certain goods, such as tobacco, which, unhealthy as it may be, is illegal to sell, possess, or consume, despite the multi-billion-dollar value of the industry. As of Christmas of 2009, 10 homeless shelters have been set up. Chris himself claims that these 10-story soup hotels house a population of 900 to 1,800 indigents and come equipped with free cable TV. This means that the small city of Quickville has a homeless population of at least 10,000 people. In comparison, the entire nation of Japan has just over 6,000. As that number has further increased to at least 17 by the time of Sonichu issue 10, which takes place only a month later. This problem has only gotten worse. The mayor's personal friends, such as Sonichu, live in state-sponsored suburban housing. He also supplied furniture for Wild Sonichu. Quickville itself mints its own currency, the Quickville Quarter. It first came to prominence in Sonichu issue 9, and comes in only two coins, the C quarter and the W quarter. 10 C quarters make up one W quarter, indicating that Chris has no idea what the word quarter actually means. The W quarter is round and golden in color, with a silver edge and a red W, while the C quarter is C-shaped and sky blue with a silver edge. Both appear to reference Chris's publishing house logo at the time, which notably appeared on the Wikipedia. Quickville still issues fines in US dollars for unknown reasons, most likely to gather funds for a tottering dictatorship. According to Chris, on the 19th of November 2019, and assuming that 6 Interbank Clearing chooses the W quarters as the main currency unit, the official exchange rate is one quarter equals approximately $2.5 US, which puts the Quickville quarter only behind the currencies of Kuwait, Bahrain, and Oman in terms of purchasing power. Also, footnote, in other words as well, that the purchasing value for one quick quarter, at least here in the UK, is round about £1.85, something like that. This extremely strong currency is likely the reason for the exceptionally high homeless rate, as the citizens of the city will find it much cheaper to produce goods in the United States, severely inhibiting the ability of local businesses to thrive. Likewise, it is likely that aforementioned banned goods like cigarettes are smuggled into the city en masse, due to being so cheap to produce abroad, which is further corroborated by claims of Chris that the city has a lot of Jews and immigrants like New York, and is on the stock exchange, implying large-scale economic collaboration and ties with the United States. I love how we go straight from a lot of Jews and immigrants like New York, and then we go straight to the invasion of Quickville. There, I swear to God, you almost couldn't make up a transition like that, even if you tried. After years of insanity and borderline totalitarianism, things finally seem to be improving, and for the citizens of Quickville. Chris had stepped down as mayor. Maji-chan was no longer spying on the populace due to his duties as Chris's husband, and beloved American film actor Brendan Fraser was elected as Chris's successor, ensuring Quickville would no longer be an ego-driven police state and would also be protected from evil mummies. Under Fraser's benevolent rule, it seemed like Quickville would finally be a free and happy place. Unfortunately, this new-founded peace and prosperity would not last long, due to the corruptions of the idea guys and their ween ideas. The idea guys convinced Chris that Quickville was under attack by various different villains and factions, placing it in a frenzied state of war. First invaded by villains from Hyperdimension Neptunia, the invaders were quickly beaten back and put into Quickville's newly established prison camps. Later, the city was invaded by the neighboring nation of Australantia. The Australantians managed to wipe out most of Quickville's military, who were forced to fight a war on two fronts when the city erupted into mass riots. The underground tunnels beneath Quickville, presumably created by Simona, who didn't want to ride the bus like a normal person, collapsed, causing mass devastation and splitting the city into two sides, east and west. The Australantians then pledged their loyalty to invading Nazis, who began ethically cleansing Quickville. They successfully captured most of Chris's hedgehog Pokemon and wiped out most of the wild Pokemon around Quickville. Chris's characters were brutally executed but quickly respawned, so it didn't really seem to matter, did it? The female Sonichus were all wrapped and impregnated until they were freed by Chris. The Nazis were finally beaten back and the city was rebuilt. Well, that was easy. Despite all of their reckless bumbling, the idea guys managed to do something no one could ever imagine was possible. Make Quickville an even worse shithole. Sure, under Chris's reign, the city was a man-child's playground escape fantasy with Orwellian undertones, but at least you could get a job at Taco Bell and live like a reasonably peaceful person if you didn't smoke or call the mayor a loser, basically. Once the idea guys took over, the city became a living hell filled with constant death and destruction, with forced labor, rap, and death camps. The lesson is simple. Being ruled by a bumbling and incompetent but well-meaning man-child might be bad, but being ruled over by murderous Nazis is at least moderately worse. Moderately worse is curiously almost downplaying such an imagination. Quickville's restoration. Chris has been rather inconsistent with what parts of Solitude 13 were actually canon and which parts he discarded. Regardless, the city was restored to its pre-war state and all the nightmarish changes were reversed. Presumably, the timeline was fixed and all the characters returned to their normal lives. And Brendan Fraser was still the mayor, with Ian Brandon Anderson serving as his chief of police. With the Nazis, evil CPUs, and reality warping demons all defeated, and a fantastic actor once again leading the city, Quickville has presumably finally become a somewhat decent place, even if everything there is ass backwards and totally absurd. Chris has written very little about Quickville following the events of issue 13. However, Chris claimed that he attended BabsCon there in 2020, and presumably all of Dimension C197 was unaffected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Lucky them, eh? Yeah, that's fantastic. Twin Towns. Quickville appears to be twinned with Charlottesville, Virginia, the largest and most familiar urban environment in Chris's life. Chris has made many connections between the two cities, mainly as a result of its narrow perception of the outside world. For example, Chris presented footage of Charlottesville as that of Quickville, while Quickville hosts the Dogwood Festival, which is in a Charlottesville tradition. Chris also stated that Quickville is as important and worthy of respect as every American citizen that begins with a C, but mentioned only Charlottesville by name, calling it the most important one of these C-villes, as if Chicago, Cincinnati, Colorado Springs, Corpus Christi, Columbus, or Cleveland, for example, were so much less important than it. If you're watching this from Chicago, Cincinnati, Colorado Springs, Corpus Christi, Columbus, or Cleveland, I guess I'm sorry. And with all that being said and done, that is where we come to an end. We can finally leave this accursed rust-built town for good. Yes, I'll end this video with what I said before. I think Morton is probably a better suburban for a modern civilization than Quickville. I think even living amongst the Amish would probably be better for everybody involved. At least then you actually do stuff instead of scrounging for sea quarters. But with all that being said and done, I will hope to see all of you guys again next time. Thank you.